think a very strong argument to be made that pharmaceutical companies have somewhat of a vested interest in making people sick.
No, I think the whole conception is insane.
Do you think that the declining birth rates are an existential problem to our way of life?
I have to say, who cares?
The who cares mentality. Well, I mean, there are going to be further generations, so we do have to think about those guys.
That is pretty arrogant to expect to know what's going to happen 2 generations out, 3 generations out. The idea that parents should have kids out of a sense of duty is one way to see birth rates decline. No, immigration doesn't embrace multiculturalism.
If you get mass amounts of immigration from other cultures, then these cultures, as much as we would like them to leave it at the door, and as much as we could try and legislate that, a lot of the times they don't leave it at the door. And we're seeing this.
The problem is not their culture. There's no political leadership out there. I mean, in the Republicans, I prefer Nikki Haley to the rest of them, but...
Do you think that Nikki Haley is smarter than Vivek Ramaswamy? Yaron Brook, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you making some time for the Reality-Based podcast.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
So one of the reasons why I love listening to your channel and listening to your commentary is you're such a staunch defender of capitalism. And in this day and age, I feel like that's becoming more and more important, because I'm not sure if this is something that you've observed, but when I look around at the current climate, I see a lot of people who are veering away from the ideas of capitalism because maybe they're seeing some of the ills of culture and society and politics, and they're looking at capitalism as maybe the problem in regards to this. So do you think that people in the West are moving away from capitalism? And if so, why do you think that's happening?
Absolutely. I think that the people who used to defend capitalism, people who we have associated in the past with the kind of political right, the left has always been anti-capitalist. The people on the political right have veered away from capitalism. They veered towards various forms of statism, primarily towards various forms of, I call it economic fascism, where the state controls. I think this has many reasons. I think partially it has to do with the fact that they associated the world in which we live today with capitalism, and therefore they associate all the ills of capitalism, all the ills of the world we have today with capitalism. And they also have misdiagnosed a lot of the problems. So they blame globalization, they blame international trade for a lot of things that have nothing to do with globalization and international trade. So there's a lot of misdiagnosis. But then there's also the reality that capitalism is a very demanding system. It demands the best of individuals. It demands you to actually live up to your potential as a human being. It demands you to be rational and work hard and engage. And I think there's a lot of, there's a general movement in our culture that's anti-reason, anti-rationality, emotionalist. Capitalism is also a system that places a lot of responsibility on the individual. Your life is yours. You've got to make whatever you make of it. Nobody else can do it for you. And there is a general move in our culture broadly towards collectivism. That is towards negation of individualism and individual responsibility, and the idea of collective responsibility, whatever that means. So both left and right have become more entrenched in their collectivism and more entrenched in the anti-reason view. And the number of people defending capitalism, even in its more moderate forms, call it, or even the partial capitalism that we have today, that number is definitely shrinking, and they seem to be getting less and less visibility in the culture, and everybody seems obsessed with the cultural issues, and everybody, in a sense, takes for granted the economics, and if anything, they take for granted the wealth, and therefore they're just more concerned about how the wealth is redistributed, not how the wealth is actually made.
Correct. So one of the big problems that I've seen over the recent years, and you look at the pandemic, people would look at that and they would say that there was big pharmaceutical companies that had a vested interest in promoting a vaccine that wasn't necessarily healthy for people, and that there was also, I think, a very strong argument to be made that pharmaceutical companies have somewhat of a vested interest in making people sick so that they're living off them for the rest of their lives, basically. And this is just one example of, I think that there are many different examples of companies that have vested interests in promoting an agenda that isn't necessarily beneficial for society and for the individual. So do you think that this is a byproduct of capitalism, and how do we fight this issue?
No, I think the whole conception is insane. I mean, that would be like farmers have an interest in people being hungry. So let's create hunger so that we can sell them more food. I mean, that's ridiculous. Pharmaceutical companies are competing. They're competing to try to make people healthier. And that competition the result of that competition is constant innovation in healthcare that makes us healthier. And the reality is that the vaccines were a massive boon and saved a lot of lives. It saved a huge number of lives on a global scale. Now, there was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of incompetence, and certainly by the political class and by our governments, particularly with regard to lockdowns, mandates, all kinds of mandates, which are a clear violation of rights, and also all kind of guarantees that for against liability that wouldn't exist in a truly capitalist economy. But to blame pharmaceuticals or business for this, I mean, is ludicrous. Look at what's the drug right now that's coming out that is dealing with obesity and allowing people who are obese to lose weight dramatically, and at the same time is massively improving heart disease. I mean, you would think that drug would be suppressed by the pharmaceutical companies if they benefited from us being sick. I mean, it's just. I mean, why do we even have penicillin? We shouldn't have penicillin because we should want people to be sick so we can sell them, magical formulas to try to cure them and make a lot of money off of it. I find the attack on the pharmaceutical industry of all the industries in the world the most ludicrous and in some ways the most unjust that I can think of. Life expectancy today is well into the 80s in most advanced countries, and in unadvanced countries, it is well into the 70s in third world countries, to a large extent because of pharmaceutical companies. They've improved the quality of life, the length of life. So many people are taking them. And if you take your pharmaceuticals seriously, you can pretty much eliminate heart disease. There's so many, the treatments, the new treatments that on a daily basis are being announced to deal with cancer, and the survivability from getting cancer is going way up. It's just sad that this is again kind of the misinformation, perversion, and distortion. Competitive markets lead pharmaceuticals to come up with new drugs constantly that are improving human life. And when a drug is found not to do that, it does not make it on the market. If anything, the problem that we have today is too much regulation. An FDA that's way too powerful, that it makes it way too expensive to bring drugs to market, and that actually takes drugs off the market that have enormous benefits to some people, but might have some side effects to a few. So we have too few drugs. We have too few freedoms. And I wish the pharmaceutical business was much freer, less regulated, and freer to provide even a wider variety of drugs and medicines for all of us. I think if we didn't have the amount of regulations we have today, I think it is not outrageous to think that life expectancy in the West could rise to 120 within a couple of decades if you got rid of the regulations. I mean, the scientific breakthroughs are amazing, and stunningly, I know this is shocking, the pharmaceutical industry is primarily composed of scientists who are trying to better human life. The idea that the pharmaceutical industry is filled with megalomaniac, evil doers from James Bond movie, conspiring to make people sick is bizarre at best.
Okay, interesting. So do you think that there is an issue with crony capitalism in the West? And could you pinpoint any of those?
Sure. There's lots of crony capitalism. There's crony capitalism all over the place. There's probably not enough competition in the pharmaceutical industry because the pharmaceutical companies probably lobby to have some regulations on themselves that keep out competitors. Because if you're big, then you can deal with the regulations, and if you're small, you can't. Our financial industry is rife with regulations, some of them a result of cronyism, where financial institutions have lobbied in order to protect themselves. There's cronyism pretty much in every industry. I mean, look at the tariffs that Trump put in place and that Biden has kept in place. That is pure cronyism. In this case, it's cronyism by the unions. Don't forget, unions are also crony actors. And it's cronyism by the steel manufacturers versus the attempted cronyism by others. So, yeah, I mean, there's a gazillion elements of cronyism in the marketplace. There's nothing unique about pharmaceuticals, and pharmaceuticals are nowhere near the worst of this. There's many, many industries that are worse. Steel manufacturers, for example, are much worse than that. Look at the fact that in the United States right now, the Japanese company Nippon is trying to buy U.S. steel, and the Biden administration is going to try to stop them, and Trump has said he would stop them. And that's pure cronyism by unions and by an American steel company that would like to get a deal in U.S. steel and doesn't want to compete with the Japanese. So it's everywhere. But cronyism is not a result of capitalism. The more capitalism you have, the less cronyism there is. Cronyism is a result of statism. When the state is allowed to regulate, you've given the state power over business. Well, of course, business is going to try to protect itself from the attack by politicians, which is constant. And then once that happens, it's going to try to manipulate the rules to get in their favor. Well, of course, that's going to happen. The only cure for cronyism is to reduce the power of government over the economy, over business, to eliminate regulations, to get them out of the way. The fewer regulations, the less power a government has over business, the less cronyism there is. The best story on this is, the story of Microsoft in the mid-1990s. Microsoft at the time was the largest corporation in the world, right? It was very successful, incredibly successful. And, it was invited to Congress in front of a committee in Congress run by a Republican, not a Democrat, a Republican. And it had to explain why it didn't do any lobbying in Washington, because at the time, Microsoft's budget for lobbying was zero. It had no offices in D.C., nothing, right? And the chairman of this committee in Congress stood up and he started yelling at the Microsoft officials. You guys better start spending money in Washington, D.C. You need to lobby here. In other words, pad my pockets, please. You need to build a building here. You need to invest in Washington. And the people at Microsoft said, you know what? We don't need you guys, right? We're the biggest company in the world. You leave us alone. We will leave you alone. And they walked out, right? 6 months later, the government comes knocking at Microsoft's door. We're here. Antitrust violation. You're offering a product for free. Bundling. We're going after you for offering a product for free, which consumers clearly benefit from. So what did Microsoft learn from that? They learned we better spend some money in Washington, D.C. We better lobby. So today, the lobbying budget of Microsoft is tens of millions of dollars. They have a beautiful building about equal distance from the White House and the Capitol Hill that is a Microsoft building. So, cronyism, there is no such thing as crony capitalism. Capitalism is the negation of cronyism. Cronyism is a phenomenon where government has power over business and where business fights back. And in fighting back, it protects its thing. But it's only made possible by giving power to government over business.
One of the other objections that we often hear about capitalism is that the nature of capitalism is that wealth disparities just become bigger and bigger as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So is the logical conclusion of capitalism a monopoly or a tyranny of monopolies?
Well, there are two questions there, one regarding inequality and one regarding monopolies. So we'll take them both. First, with regard to wealth distribution, the poor do not get poorer under capitalism. That is bizarre, right? Indeed, capitalism is the only system in all of human history that has brought people out of poverty. Before capitalism, everybody was poor. 96% of the human population on planet Earth was below what the UN defines as extreme poverty. Today, because of capitalism, 100% because of capitalism, only 8% of the world population is, and most of that is in Africa, is considered extremely poor in extreme poverty. So no, capitalism is the only system in human history that has raised people out of poverty. Now, it is true that capitalism increases inequality. When when there's no capitalism, and you can look at Venezuela right now, you can look at North Korea, you can look at pretty much any place in the world with no capitalism. What you have is relative equality. Everybody is poor. And if you want to be equal, cool. Everybody has to be poor. That's what equality generates.
So
but what capitalism does is it makes everybody richer, but some people richer than others. So what? Who cares, right? If some people get richer than others. Indeed, the fact that some people get richer than others is what enables the poor to get richer. That is, it is the people who are speeding ahead in terms of inequality. They're the ones who are creating the wealth that helps the poor rise up from extreme poverty. So relative poverty is always there, but absolute poverty shrinks dramatically.
One of the things that I found most fascinating in my travels is going to South Korea. And when we got there, it's amazing, the technology in South Korea, the amount of wealth and prosperity that they have for an Asian country, considering that I think in the 1950s, they were one of the poorest countries in the entire world. Yep. And the difference between them and North Korea, apparently you can see it from space. I'm not 100% sure that that's true, but the difference between them and North Korea is just completely and utterly day and night, literally. So, why do you think it is that South Korea is so much richer than North Korea?
So first, you can absolutely see it from space. You can see these satellite photographs at night, and North Korea, the whole place is dark. There's barely any lights. And South Korea, particularly around Seoul, but other parts of South Korea, all lit up, right? So half of the peninsula is all lit up. Half of the peninsula is completely dark. And the reason is simple. South Korea has embraced markets, not pure markets, not capitalism the way I would want it, but some capitalism, some freedom, property rights, protections, contracts, respect contracts. Individuals can do what they want. They can pursue whatever career they want. They can consume what they want. They can live where they want. They can work as hard as they want or not. And of course, the way they get paid is going to reflect that. So basically, South Korea is a free country. North Korea is not. Free countries generate wealth. Unfree countries do not. So South Korea is rich because it's embraced some elements of capitalism that have led it towards freedom and towards wealth generation. North Korea is basically socialist, authoritarian. There's no freedom, zero individual rights, zero property rights, zero contracts, and therefore it's dirt poor.
I told you before the show that I had a MAGA communist on my show, and I was familiarizing you with the idea of MAGA communism. One of the ideas that these guys sort of bring across is that North Korea is actually a better place than South Korea, because North Korea, they're sticking it to the man, right? So North Korea are very anti-imperialist, and they don't succumb to the sort of global financial system. And actually in North Korea, things maybe aren't so bad. And then moving forward, as we move into a post-capitalist world, the North Koreans would have done things right and they'll be rewarded in the end. But when you do look at South Korea, for example, getting back to the point of monopolies, they do have quite a monopolistic society in a way, because the Kaibols, which is the big corporations in South Korea, the government basically invests all of everything into the Kaibols, like Samsung, and I think it's Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and companies like this. Do you sympathize at all with the MAGA communists in the sense that the monopoly type system that they've got in South Korea is commodifies the people and they should be maybe sticking it to the man?
It is the most disgusting point of view I've heard in a very long time. I mean, these are people who obviously think Stalin was a hero and really think Hitler was a hero. I mean, this is the equivalent of what North Korea is. So they think it's okay that, about every decade, North Korea goes through a famine in which hundreds of thousands of people die of starvation. I mean, when was the last time the Western world has had a famine? You'd have to go back about 300 years or more to find it. Since the invention of capitalism, there's been no famines in the Western world. Indeed, even in Africa, there are very few famines, because in Africa has embraced elements of capitalism, and therefore there are no famines there, or fewer, much fewer than there used to be. North Korea, because of the way it is people die of starvation. These people, people in North Korea cannot think for themselves. Any idea that they present that is not approved of by the supreme leader they are murdered, they are killed. Is this the kind of world they want to live in? It really is sick that given the actual information that we have about the consequence of communism, everywhere it's tried, and North Korea is a great example of it, that anybody would put communism as part of their ideology. It is an evil. The people themselves, they're clearly evading reality. I consider them evil, their ideology an evil ideology, and them for holding that ideology beneath contempt. Yes, South Korea has certain monopolistic tendencies. That, in that sense, it's not purely capitalist. It has these family-run large businesses that are very enmeshed with the government, and that is unfortunate, I think, to the extent that South Korea does that. Its economy right now, for example, is relatively stagnating. Now that they're rich, I should note, now that they don't have famines, now that people can pretty much do what they want and live the way they want to live, they are stagnating, partially because the structure of chaebols makes it very difficult to continue growing once you become rich. You need what South Korea right now needs is massive reform that takes power away from these chaebols and basically allows for real entrepreneurship and real innovation. And I think they'll get there. I mean, I hope they get there. South Korea is a pretty dynamic and exciting place. If you've ever been to Seoul, it's a pretty amazing place. And I encourage anybody who considers themselves a MAGA communist to parachute into North Korea. I mean, maybe we can help them do it. Maybe we can airdrop them into North Korea and live there a little bit. Maybe the demonstrators about Gaza can be airdropped into Gaza, and the pro North Koreans can be airdropped into North Korea. That might be a solution for the West.
Yeah, certainly.
By the way,
I wouldn't
for kidnapping anybody and dropping them there.
Well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be wanting to make that parachute journey myself. I think that I saw enough from the demilitarized zone for me to be quite content with that. So another argument that is often made is that actually capitalism is good for us, and it's good for the West. It's good for the rich people in the West, but it exploits the developing world, and it actually just exploits the developing world for their resources, etc. And it's really bad for these countries. How would you respond to that argument?
Well, again, I think it's completely ridiculous. African countries that have embraced elements of capitalism, Botswana, Namibia, to some extent, a little bit Rwanda, have vastly higher GDP growth and economic growth and much more successful societies. Botswana, in particular, has also a relatively free political system. And is doing quite well, and part of it is so first, to the extent the poor countries embrace capitalism, they succeed. Look at and let's think again. South Korea, that you mentioned earlier, used to be one of the poorest countries in the world. It used to be poorer than North Korea. Now it's one of the richest countries in the world and incredibly successful. Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan after World War II were all third world countries. They were all very, very, very poor. They embraced capitalism. They succeeded. You could make the same case for Malaysia and Indonesia. They're they haven't embraced capitalism quite as much, but to the extent that they have become richer and are moving towards becoming rich countries, it's because they're embracing capitalism. Now, this idea of exploitation is, again, what exactly is being exploited? These countries have natural resources. They don't know how to extract the natural resources. They don't know what to do with those natural resources. Indeed, the whole concept of natural resources is a perverse concept, because these so-called natural resources, until somebody discovers what to do with them and how to use them, and they're just there. That oil, up until the mid-19th century, oil, if you had oil on your property and it was oozing out of the ground, that lowered the value of the property because you couldn't grow anything on it. It was just gunk. It was horrible stuff. What do you do with it? And it's only once you discover how to refine it and how to use it and how to extract it properly and all of that does it gain value. So the fact that these poor countries have these resources, it's only the fact that the West has a use for them that gives them value. And what the West does and I'm not saying in all cases, certainly there are situations of exploitation, but in most cases, the West cuts a deal where we will pay you to extract this resource, but we'll pay you money you wouldn't have gotten otherwise because you have no use for these resources. Like, what use does an African country have for, I don't know, uranium? They don't have any use for it. They can't do anything with it. They don't have the technology. They don't have the science. They don't know what to do with it. In the West, you can use it to make electricity. So, we'll extract the uranium. We'll we'll pay you for it, and we'll use it in productive ways. So, no, this is win-win. Where where there is a government on the other side that is respectful, at least to some extent, of property rights. Look, all of these countries in Africa, could tomorrow become significantly wealthier if they embraced freedom, if they embraced property rights for their own people. Imagine if the people in Africa actually as individuals, got the right to the land that they live on, including the natural resources of that land. Then they could cut deals with Western companies or African companies or whatever. Instead, corrupt dictators cut the deals, and they funnel their money into Swiss bank accounts. But the problem there is the corrupt dictators and their political system, not capitalism.
I'm interested to know, just sort of on the back of that, do you think that China's Belt Road Initiative and the way in which they're going about the world and sort of planting their interests everywhere, do you think that that's moral?
I don't think anything China does is moral, right? Because it shouldn't be the Chinese government. I don't think governments should be going around the world giving loans and going around the world building infrastructure. I don't think any government should do that. I don't think the United States should be giving out foreign aid. I think it's immoral for governments to spend their own people's money on ambitions for empire or ambitions to do charity or to buy influence around the world. I think all of that is immoral. I certainly think what China's doing is immoral, but it's not capitalism, right? Capitalism says the government does not interfere in the economy, including the economies of other countries. It just doesn't interfere in the economy. So if private Chinese companies want to go to Sri Lanka and build a port, yay, good for them, as long as it's privately funded and it's all legit. But for the Chinese government to do it is wrong, it's immoral, and beware if you're an African or Asian country, if you're getting money from China, beware what strings come attached to that money.
Do you think that the declining birth rates in the West, I mean, we just mentioned South Korea, I think they're actually below 1 right now. Do you think that they are an existential problem to our way of life?
Not in my lifetime, not even in your lifetime, not in my children's lifetime, and probably not in my grandchildren's lifetime. So I have to say, who cares, right? Birth rates change over time. Values change over time. Economic and social conditions change over time. I'm not worried about birth rates, particularly if you allow for immigration. I think the birth rate problem is particularly bad and particularly problematic in economies that don't allow for immigrants, because then you get real decline in GDP and you could get real decline in standard of living and in wealth creation. You just don't have enough people, particularly if you have a big welfare state and you got a bunch of people retiring and you have no young people working to pay for those retirees. So bring in young immigrants, basically as slaves, to your old population so that you can pay the welfare to your old people, which is what I think Europe has done, right? Why do we have so many immigrants in Europe? To pay for the welfare state for aging Germans. I mean, that's the reason. And the same goes around the world. So, I think that the reasons for the declining birth rate have a lot to do with a world that is very pessimistic, a world. If you grow up today and you go to school today in kindergarten and in primary school and high school, you look like a young guy. So your generation or even younger than you were taught from when you were very young that human beings destroy the earth, that we're destroying the environment, that life on earth is very precarious. And we're probably all going to boil to death in the future because of global warming. I mean, how long did Greta give us a few years ago? What was it, 8 years?
I think it was 8 years, yeah.
8 years, and I think we're 3 years into that. We've only got 5 years. Why would anybody have kids if they buy the propaganda that we've only got 5 years, or we only got a generation, or the world is coming to an end, why would they buy the propaganda? If you really believe, if you're a MAGA communist and you think North Korea is really the ideal society, why would anybody have kids if that's the direction we're heading? I mean, there's so much. I believe that birth rates are related to optimism and pessimism. I think right now, the West in particular, and I think rich Asian countries as well, we just are in a morbid state of mind. I think this is because of the philosophy we hold. We as cultures believe that, we don't value ourselves. We don't value the wealth we've created. We've kind of taken it all for granted. We're afraid of the future. World War III is around the corner. We know, in the West, we think all our wealth was built in colonialism and exploiting other people. So we think we're all guilty. In that state of mind, who wants to have kids? I mean, there's also one of the things that goes along with having kids, it turns out, is sex. And there's what do they call it? A sex recession right now, right? People are not having sex in all age groups, not having sex, or a lot less.
I think the bottom of the barrel are not. There are a lot more people stacking up at the bottom that aren't. But then it's this strange social phenomenon that as especially women get into the workforce more, and as especially women become a little bit more equal in terms of their earning capacity, they're actually going for more high status men because they tend to look upwards in terms of dating. They tend to date hypergamously. And then there are a lot more men stacking up at the bottom that are having less opportunities with women.
Yeah, but I think generally, but it seems like, I mean, the stats I've seen is that this is a phenomena that's culture-wide. That is, maybe that's also going on, but it's also true that married couples having less sex, older married couples having less sex. That is, generally, we live in a culture that's having less sex. Now,
maybe it's something to do with porn. It could be something to do with the rise of internet porn and being able to access your kicks elsewhere.
I go back to my hypothesis about pessimism. Sex is a celebration of life. Sex is affirmation of life. It's the sense that, yes, life is worth living. This is amazing. It's the pleasure that comes from that sense of it's great to be alive. And sex gets better the more you have that sense about the world. And I think that if you're a pessimist, as our culture is overwhelming these days, if you're morbid, if you're convinced that everything's going to hell, sex, the appetite for sex goes away. Yeah, there's
nothing to have more sex.
Nothing to celebrate.
I would agree in terms of the birth rates. I just want to quiz you on a few things you said there. So your response initially to the birth rates was kind of, who cares? I'm not going to be here. My kids might not even be here. Yeah. And then you said that you think that an answer could be bringing in more immigrants. To me, and tell me how I'm wrong, but this seems to me sort of like something that is a system that's bound to collapse. Because if you're just bringing in immigrants, then you're encouraging multiculturalism, and we sort of lose the foundation of who we are as a country. And also the who cares mentality. Well, I mean, there are going to be further generations, so we do have to think about those guys.
They'll think about it. I mean, if people think too far into the future, that is pretty arrogant to expect to know what's going to happen 2 generations out, 3 generations out. It's pretty arrogant to know what technology is going to be like. I mean, we're going to have test tube babies in the future. If we need more people, we'll just create them. I mean, who knows, right? Science fiction. The point is, the more you think out further into the future, the less you know, and the more humble you should be about any conclusions you come. You have literally no idea what life on Earth is going to be like in 50 years. We barely know what life is going to be like in 10 years. Nobody saw this revolution in AI coming. Nobody saw the internet before it was created. Nobody saw CRISPR gene editing and the ability. I mean, so the idea that we could project out into the future, we know there's going to be a problem in 50 years, we should fix it now, is central planning on steroids, and I think should be avoided at all costs.
I think when you're talking about central planning, that's a good point in terms of governments doing these big overreaching things, like when you're talking about climate change, for example. But on the individual level, I'm not sure it is. When it comes to the individual level and having a family, for example, this is something that I believe is constant throughout time, and it's kind of, I guess, something that you might call wisdom, is the fact that having a family is something that's going to be productive, and building your sort of family network around you is something that is going to be good for the future, because you get to, at the very least, have a legacy.
I know people who are living phenomenal lives, happy life, successful life, who've never had kids. And never, having a family needs to be something you really want. It has to be self-interested. It has to be something you're going to enjoy. Life is too short to think, oh, I should have a family because I'm worried about civilization in 50 years. I don't give a shit about civilization in 50 years if you're going to impose a family on me today for that. Now, I have a family. I've done my thing, right, for civilization in the future. But I didn't do it because I was worried about civilization. I did it because I've always wanted to have kids. I love kids. I love the process. I love the challenge. I love what's involved in having kids. The idea that parents should have kids out of a sense of duty is one way to see birth rates decline. Because that sense of duty will disincentivize people to have it. You should have kids because it's a wonderful experience to engage in raising children and having children. But you asked a different question before about immigration. Yes. No,
Yeah.
immigration doesn't embrace multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is the idea that all cultures are created equal, that there's no difference between culture. Now, that idea is absolutely wrong. Western civilization has a far superior culture than any culture in all of human history.
Yep.
Immigration should be embraced under the assumption that every human being on planet Earth, no matter their skin color or no matter their particularly genetic makeup, has the ability to embrace Western civilization. The Western civilization is not embedded in your genes. It's not, because we in the West used to be pretty barbaric. So we learned something and became better. Immigration is the recognition that anybody can embrace a culture. America, whether the MAGA like it or not, is a land of immigrants. It's a land of immigrants from all kinds of places, including places that at the time were considered barbaric and primitive and third world, like Ireland and Italy and Poland and and Russia. And there was a huge amount of racism in the 19th century against immigrants from certain parts of Europe. But immigration is a recognition that all human beings can embrace Western civilization, and that they're welcome to embrace that civilization. And it's true that if you allow immigrants in and say, keep your culture, we love your culture's great, then that's suicide. And that's what, to a large extent, Europe is doing right now, particularly with its Muslim immigration, is saying, no, Islam is fantastic. You guys can stay crazy Muslims, and you can come here. That's the wrong approach. The approach needs to be, you can come here. We don't care if you're Muslim or otherwise. But all of that cultural stuff that you're leaving needs to be left behind. You now need to embrace Western civilization, and we will hold you to it, both in terms of language, in terms of the work requirements that you have, and and in terms of your behavior. If you violate our laws, you will go to jail for a very long time. We're not going to be loose with you because you're immigrants or because you're from a different culture. We don't accept that all cultures are equal. That's the kind of immigration I think I would like to see, and the kind of immigration used to be part of the West.
And it probably should be like that and should be at scale. But when you're looking at Islamic immigration, just for an example, I'm in the UK at the moment. When you walk around London, it doesn't look like London anymore. It's because they've had such a mass amount of Islamic immigration. And unfortunately, if you have a mass Islamic immigration like that, this is a culture that believes that the whole entire world should be Islamic. And, a lot of them aren't extreme like that. But if you get so many of them at one point, it gets to the point now where England is actually electing heaps of different Muslim leaders. And I think that that's a huge problem. So just in terms of immigration and the birth rates, I think that encouraging the family and encouraging the birth rates within your culture is so much more productive than encouraging mass amounts of immigration to fill the workforce. Because if you get mass amounts of immigration from other cultures, then these cultures, as much as we would like them to leave it at the door, and as much as we could try and legislate that, a lot of the times they don't leave it at the door. And we're seeing this.
The problem is not their culture. The problem is our culture. The problem is our unwillingness to stand by our culture. The problem is our unwillingness to defend our culture. If we had done to Islamist, jihadist culture after 9/11 what they deserve to be done to them, if we had stood up in self-defense and declared their culture to be barbaric and primitive, we wouldn't have this problem today. And the idea of encouraging people to have babies is so perverse. God, I mean, there's so many parents out there that I hope never have babies because they're horrible human beings and will make horrible parents, and the kids that they raise will be horrible human beings as well. And yet I don't want the government to decide who should have parents and who should be parents and who should not. I want the government to stay out of it completely. Individuals should decide whether they want to be parents or not. It's very simple. We either believe in freedom or we don't believe in freedom. And if you believe in freedom, then the government has no business incentivizing kids or not incentivizing kids. Just leave people alone. Now, to the extent that the people who have influence over this help us create a good culture, a culture that people love living in, I think they will have kids. But if they don't, they don't. What's important is your life, your kid's life that you can imagine. Beyond that, I have to repeat, who cares, right? You can't project that far into the future. You don't know what the situation is going to be. And, to really get demographic collapse, we're talking about many generations. The population of the world is not going to go to zero, in the foreseeable or unforeseeable future. So we need to calm down about birth rates. We need to just have the kids that we want to have, be concerned about our own happiness and our own prosperity, stop worrying about this civilizational issue. What really matters are ideas. What really matters is whether we embrace capitalism or not. And the way to make sure that these Muslim immigrants are not destructive is, one, stand up against Islam where it counts, including on the battlefield, and two, stand up for Western values. There would be a lot less problems in England with Muslims if, when those rape gangs in parts of England that were Muslim were all put in jail and the keys thrown away, if the police had actually enforced the laws. The problem is that the police were intimidated. They didn't want to offend the Muslims. So let's enforce the laws as they are dictated by Western civilization, and let's insist that whoever immigrates into our countries follows those laws. I don't think you'll have a problem once you do that. For example, right now in London, if the police will not enforce the right of, let's say, somebody who's Jewish walking in the streets, if they won't enforce his right just to do that because they don't want to get entangled with the Muslim protesters, that's the problem. The problem is the police won't stand up for the rights of individuals, and they are letting the thugs win. And once you let the thugs win, guess what happens? More thugs are created, right? And incentivize the creation of more thugs. So what you need to do is stand up to the thugs, stand up to the bullies.
No, I think we can definitely find some common ground there about the grooming gangs. They should absolutely have the keys thrown away without a shadow of a doubt. Can I try and extend one more olive branch here? You
Sure.
said before that you think that one of the biggest problems that we have is pessimism. I would agree with that. I think that people thinking that the world's going to end in 8 years is a massive problem. And I would say that we need to try and encourage more positivity about the West, about ideas such as capitalism, and about the founding of the countries that have literally built the world we live in, so that people can be more optimistic and want to have children, so that we don't have a falling birth rate.
Fine. I mean, I don't want to do it so that people have kids. I don't care if you have kids or not. That's your business, not mine. And as I said, there's certain people who I don't think should have kids. And so I prefer to leave it to them and make it expensive, so that if you're going to have kids, then commit, make sure you do it and do a good job at it. But yes, look, at the end of the day, everything is about ideas. The world is shaped by ideas, not by demographics, not by geography. And by the way, the only country that was actually founded is the United States. The rest of the countries just happen to be around, sitting around there, and have benefited enormously from the founding of America. But let's stand up for the ideas that made the West successful. Capitalism, individual rights, liberty more broadly, the idea of reason and individualism and political freedom. Those are the ideas that made the West what it is. There is no West without reason, individualism, and political liberty. And if we can stand up to those ideas, the rest becomes irrelevant. I think that breeds a very positive, optimistic culture. I think a side effect of that is people will have more kids. But I think a side effect of that also is more immigrants, that I think you get both. Because I don't want to open immigration up because I want to help the economy. I want to open immigration up because I think people should have a right to move where they want to move. And I hate the idea that there are very talented, very conscientious, very good people stuck because of complete bad luck in some society where they cannot live up to their potential. That, you know, you happen to be born in Afghanistan, so you're stuck living in Afghanistan. That's horrible. You know, it would be cool if the better people in Afghanistan could get out and come to a place where they can live a better life and have kids.
Absolutely. So we talk a lot about like pessimism and optimism. And in terms of capitalism itself, I'm trying to think about the future of this because I'm no expert on this by any means. So this is why I love to talk to you about this sort of thing. With the future of this, do you think that it lies in education or it lies in media, politics? How do we get people to be more positive when it comes to the ideas of capitalism and embracing this and not seeing it as some sort of evil?
It's all about education. I mean, education in the broad sense, education in terms of formal education, but also in the broad sense of educating people. It's all about education. It's all about ideas. I mean, politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from education and philosophy, ideas. And what we need are better ideas. And then what you need are intellectuals and teachers articulating those ideas in the public. And slowly the culture will change and embrace. I mean, you know, Margaret Thatcher wasn't elected by accident, right? I mean, the United Kingdom was heading down this slope of socialism. It was horrible. Both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party were both basically socialist parties at that point, and it was getting ugly and it was getting bad, and the economy was shattered. But in the background, there were people advocating for different ideas. You know, she was heavily influenced by Hayek. There were think tanks. There were people talking about this. There were books out there. There was Ayn Rand. There was Mises. There were others who were changing kind of the tone of the culture and saying there's a different way. There's an alternative. We should try capitalism. That's how we got rich. Maybe we can get rich again using capitalism. And in spite of the fact that I know in the UK, Thatcher is still considered negatively, she changed that country completely. And she made it so much better. I remember England, London in the 70s, and London is such a better place today. In spite of the Muslim population, London is 1,000 times better now than it was in the 1970s. 1970s, it was dirty. It was horrible. You know, the stores were very mediocre. Customer service was non-existent. You walked into a store in London and they would go, "What do you want?" I mean, and you know, there was no customer.
The Brits are pretty grumpy, to be fair, you know.
It was very grumpy. The British, but they were much grumpier back then than they were, let's say, in the 90s and 2000s. I think that back to being grumpy because of you know, the disaster the Conservative Party has turned out to be. But for a while there, they were actually kind of pleasant. Which is you know, quite an improvement. Maybe they were having more kids as they were pleasant, and now they're having less because they're grumpy again. But so I think what you need is that. What you need is laying the ideological foundation for a change and education. And it's very difficult because people like MAGA, the whole populist movement, and the left as well, are all much better in a sense that they appeal to emotion. They just get people riled up. They get people excited. They use fear. They use fear very well, right? I mean, the left uses fear of climate change, or the MAGA people use fear of World War III, or use fear of declining birth rates, or use fear of the Chinese are taking our jobs, the immigrants are destroying our country. So the left and right are very good at using fear. And capitalism, those of us trying to educate the world about capitalism, we're not about fear. We're about, like, let's make the world a better place. Let's improve human life. Let's make things better and make things great. And it's sad, but the reality is that is not a message that our culture seems open to right now. They want to be fearful. Yeah. They want to be afraid.
Well, there's something that's intoxicating about fear sometimes, I think. Yes. So I want to get your take on the election that's coming up in the United States. I want to go out on a whim here and say, I might be completely wrong about this, but I want to say that you might be a Ron Paul guy.
No.
No? You weren't a part of the whole libertarian thing?
No. Certainly not Ron Paul. Yeah. No.
Who do you like in this coming up cycle?
Nobody. Literally
nobody.
no. This is. I mean, it just every cycle I think can't get any worse than this, and every cycle it gets worse than it was before. There's literally nobody. This cycle is horrible. You've got two statists running against each other, both old men. One is basically half senile and barely knows what he's doing, and is now, basically, handing the keys over to the far left. So the other one is somebody who is instinctively and in every kind of sense an authoritarian, believes in nothing except in getting attention to himself, a complete narcissist, and not particularly smart, economically has the economic IQ of a third grader. That's Trump. And so, that is the two options that we have. And then you have RFK, who just the day before yesterday said that a parasite had eaten part of his brain. And I mean, he literally said this. I'm not making this up. And I believe it completely, given that, again, the guy's just, these people are not smart. All three of them are not smart. They don't know what they're doing. They have no clue about what made America great. They have no clue about what the founding fathers stood for. They have no clue about capitalism. They have no clue about foreign policy. They have no foreign policy strategy, any of them. And it's a complete and utter disaster. And the sad thing is that if you ask me, okay, who's in the wings, right, in the periphery, who could replace them? I mean, the people who were decent 10 years ago have all become brainless MAGA, nobodies. I mean, there used to be a contingent within the Senate that I thought, okay, they're like 5 or 6 senators who are really good. They're pro-free markets. They get the principles. They can cite the founding fathers. They get the ideas. They're pro-individual rights. And God, over the last 5, 6 years, they've all, one after the other, basically given up on all of those ideas and turned statist, every single one of them. So I just don't. And the reason there's nobody in the wings is because the Americans don't want them, right? America has become a statist country. It's abandoned its founding principles. It's abandoned the ideas of, America doesn't like woke. And so it's rejected the far left. But in terms of what it likes, it has no clue. And it's kind of somewhere between centrist, leave us alone types and MAGA, yeah, all right, so somebody, and mainly Americans are pro-MAGA because they hate the left so much that they'll vote for this. But there's no coherent alternative ideology, and there are no leaders. There's just no political leadership out there. I mean, and the Republicans, I preferred Nikki Haley to the rest of them, but I mean, again, she was not afraid.
What is it about Nikki Haley that you like particularly?
She wasn't afraid of using the word capitalism. I thought that was, she wrote op-eds about capitalism. Now, I don't think she understood what it was, but at least she wasn't afraid of using the word. Nobody else talks about capitalism. And, she at least had a semblance of an idea about foreign policy. She had some idea about it. Trump is clueless when it comes to foreign policy. And Biden is clueless when it comes to foreign policy. And I think Bush was, and I think Obama was, and I think they all were. I think Nikki Haley has some principles and some ideas, and she seems to be willing to stand by them. Again, I'm not excited about her, but given the field, it's better than the alternatives.
Do you think that Nikki Haley is smarter than Vivek Ramaswamy?
Vivek is probably smarter. There's no question. Vivek is probably off the charts smart, but Vivek is clueless, right? You can be smart and clueless. Vivek wants to be liked. I mean, he reminds me of Trump. He's a kind of a bit of a narcissist. He wants to be liked. He wants to get the populist group, so he latches onto ideas, that are basically crazy. The way to solve the drug war is to intensify it. That's the way to solve the drug war. We should invade Mexico, right? We should go to war with Mexico to solve the drug war. When has that ever helped? When has a war on an inanimate object like drugs ever solved a problem? We should have learned from Prohibition that you don't solve the mafia problem by having more prohibition. You solve the problem of organized crime by making things legal, not by doubling up and making things illegal.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd agree with you about that point about Vivek in terms of the Mexico thing. That was a bit strange and eyebrow raising. But I really would have thought that you would have been a bit more favorable towards Vivek because he is a business guy. He's had a big pharma company and he seems to have done well as a capitalist himself. But what is it exactly that you don't like about him?
Should have stayed in business. I mean, he's really good in business. He has, I think his foreign policy across the board was awful. He figured that in order to kind of outflank Trump from the right, he would have to be, even more pro-Russia and more anti-China than even Trump was. So foreign policy was terrible, and domestic issues, he was all over the place. Some stuff I loved, right? When he said, "I'm going to fire half the bureaucrats in Washington" or whatever. Cool, I'm all for that. But half of it was completely nutty. So. He was this mixture of. He seemed like he was trying to cultivate the MAGA, but didn't quite get that they were actually statist. So he had still some elements of free markets in his thinking. But no, he was incoherent. He didn't have a coherent political philosophy. I wish he had. I was, when he first announced, he seemed interesting and he's super articulate, super charismatic. I did find it. I don't know if you saw this clip yesterday of him interviewing
Ann Coulter.
Ann Coulter. Yep. And the first thing she tells him on the interview is, "I really agreed with you on a lot of things, but I would have never voted for you because you're an Indian." So right off the bat, Ann Coulter comes out as a racist. That was amazing. I mean, it was perfect. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about Vivek, but a lot to not like about him. And I found him to be his sucking up to Trump, his sucking up to MAGA generally, just unpleasant and bad form and unappealing. That's
interesting. It's
maybe
interesting.
We'll get a candidate one day that is more like. I'm a fan right now of Milei's. I don't agree.
I was literally just going to say that. I was going to say my next guest was going to be Javier Milei. Do you like him because he's a afuera to the bureaucracy?
I'm a fan of Milei because I disagree with him on some things like abortion. He claims to be an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not an anarchist, and he's got another set of ideas that I think are crazy. But here's a guy who knows economics. I mean, he knows economics. He knows what needs to be done. He seems like he's willing to do it, which takes a lot of courage, particularly in Argentina. He's also got a good foreign policy, right? I mean, the first thing Argentina he did was saying, "No, I'm not joining BRICS. I'm with the West. I like the United States. I like Europe. I prefer them to Russia and China and all in Saudi Arabia. I'm not joining BRICS." And then he's supportive of Ukraine, which I think is certainly the right stance to take. He's supportive of Israel, which is unusual for a libertarian. Most libertarians are anti-Israel. I give him a lot of credit. I mean, here's a guy who knows, he's real capitalist, knows economics, and has a really good foreign policy. Probably from a foreign policy perspective, maybe the best leader right now in the world. And is willing to go to the World Economic Forum and lecture them against collectivism. I mean, good for him. I'm not sure he has the proper grasp of what individualism is, but he has a better grasp than most of the people out there. So good for him.
Now, just on this topic, if you had to give me an avatar, you could create an avatar of your perfect candidate for 2028. They've got their own party. Maybe it can be the Ayn Rand party or the what's the Ayn Rand philosophy again? Objectivism, the Objectivist Party or something like that. What would they look like?
We call it the Capitalist Party.
Boom, like it.
Yeah, and if somebody wants to Google Capitalist Party USA, you can find their founding document, kind of their policy statement, which I agree with completely. It is, they don't run any candidates because the support for the Capitalist Party, I don't know, is 5 people, maybe. Maybe it's a few thousand, but it's not very large. So it exists. I mean, there are people who have thought about this and put it in writing and put it into a document. And it basically is, right? What do we need to do? We need to get rid of regulations. We need to get rid of the regulatory agencies. We need to get rid of all cronyism, and you do that by eliminating regulations, but also eliminate all subsidies, lower the corporate tax rate to zero. If there's a corporate tax rate of zero, there's nothing to deduct from taxes, so people don't have to argue about what's deductible or what's not. Just make it zero at the corporate level. A flat, low tax in the United States. All corporate welfare is zero, and then start phasing out entitlements and start phasing out the welfare state, slowly, because people have become dependent on it, and you don't want to just throw them off a cliff. So you slowly phase it out, maybe over a generation or two. But the key focus should be on getting rid of regulations, simplifying and lowering taxes. And the primary focus is dramatically cutting government spending. And then on foreign policy, the only thing that the U.S. government should be interested in when it comes to foreign policy is protecting American lives and property, and orienting the foreign policy towards that and securing trade, really, facilitating global trade. And then, but if somebody violates the rights of Americans, crush them. I mean, just destroy them. That is, none of this, wishy-washy, we're building democracies around the world. You kill Americans, you're dead, right? And that should be the foreign policy stance. You know what will happen? They'll stop killing Americans very quickly, and they'll stop interfering, and they'll stopping trade. These Houthis who are stopping trade in the Red Sea. I mean, if America had a proper response within 24 hours, it would be over. It would be done, and the Houthis would stop. So, that's the foreign policy that I would suggest, and a domestic policy. It would be preserve a woman's right to an abortion. It would preserve people's right to have contracts, including marriage contracts, with whoever the frigging they want to have a marriage with. Get the state out of my bedroom. Get the state out of my body. Get rid of the FDA. Allow for private agencies to come about, to rate and give us safety reports on various drugs. Liberate the pharmaceutical companies to actually extend human life and to improve human health dramatically. Yeah, I mean, I think you would have. I think the United States, which today grows at maybe 1%, 2%, sometimes 2% growth, maybe on occasion 3%, but usually closer to 2%. You could have 6% growth in America, and 6% growth in America is unimaginable in terms of the improvement of human life. You wipe out poverty within a generation. Within 2 generations, nobody is making them less than 6 figures in real terms.
Yaron Brook, this has been absolutely fascinating. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm so glad you came on the channel.
Absolutely,
looking forward to sharing it. If you don't mind telling everybody where they can find you, where they can find your books and everything, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a website, yaronbrookshow.com. They can also find me on YouTube, where most of my commentary is on. I also I'm on Facebook. Just put my name in. Not Facebook. I hate Facebook. On Twitter, where you can easily find me. Just Google. Just search my name, and then my books. I've got a number of books that are all available on Amazon. Just put Yaron Brook on Amazon. Our equal is on FAIR, Free Market Revolution, and the latest book is Moral Case for Finance, In Pursuit of Wealth. So. The books are easy to find. But yeah, the place where there's most activity is on YouTube, on any podcasting app.
And I'll link all of those below. And also, I'm going to be hosting debates on this channel at some point. So if you ever wanted to jump on and debate your ideas, then we could get you an interlocutor.
Yeah, do it. I mean, I'm always happy to debate, and if debates generate a big audience, which is good. So I'll pretty much debate any topic. So
fantastic! It's music to my ears.
Somebody to debate against me, and we'll go at it. It should be fun.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Yaron.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye.